We live in an age that prides itself on freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom to define our own lives. At least, that is what we are told. Yet beneath the surface of this promise lies an uncomfortable truth. Our minds are not as free as we believe. Every day, unseen forces shape our decisions, mold our desires, and even construct our identities. It is a hidden war, not fought with weapons and armies, but with symbols, narratives, and subtle psychological manipulations. From the earliest days of civilization, rulers understood that controlling people's beliefs was more powerful than controlling their bodies. Ancient empires relied on myths of divine authority to keep subjects obedient. The Roman strategy of bread and circuses pacified the masses with food and entertainment. Religion, monarchies, revolutions, all used persuasion as their foundation. Physical chains were never enough. True power came from invisible chains wrapped around the human mind. Today, those chains have only grown more complex. Corporations study behavioral psychology to design advertisements that bypass rational thought and hook directly into emotion. Politicians repeat slogans until truth dissolves into mere familiarity. Social media platforms use algorithms that learn more about us than we know about ourselves, gently pushing us toward outrage, distraction, and endless consumption. What looks like freedom of choice often collapses into the illusion of choice, carefully engineered by forces we rarely notice. This is why manipulation is so dangerous. It thrives in plain sight. We laugh at propaganda posters of the past, yet we rarely recognize that our own lives are saturated with propaganda far more sophisticated than anything the 20th century produced. Our preferences, our fears, even our definitions of morality are constantly nudged and redirected by those who understand one simple truth. People rarely think for themselves. They only think with the categories they are given. Niccolò Machiavelli, writing half a millennium ago, understood this with chilling clarity. To him, morality was irrelevant in politics. What mattered was power and the perception of power. Leaders did not need to be good, they only needed to appear good. The masses did not need truth, they needed stories that satisfied their fears and desires. For Machiavelli, manipulation was not an unfortunate byproduct of politics, it was politics itself. And here lies the unsettling question. If our choices, our beliefs, and even our sense of reality are shaped long before we recognize them, then what does freedom really mean? Are we autonomous individuals making decisions with clarity? Or are we puppets dancing to strings we cannot see? This video is not meant to comfort you. It is meant to reveal. By the time we are finished, you will see manipulation everywhere. In the headlines you read, in the products you buy, in the values you defend. You will understand the mechanics of how power works, and more importantly, how to resist it. But to resist, you must first be willing to look into the mirror Machiavelli held up to humanity. A mirror that shows us not who we wish to be, but who we truly are. To understand the anatomy of manipulation, we must go back 500 years to a man whose very name has become synonymous with cunning, deceit, and ruthless strategy, Niccolò Machiavelli. Born in 1469 in Florence, Machiavelli grew up in a world torn apart by shifting alliances, bloody betrayals, and ceaseless wars between rival states. Renaissance Italy was not the land of serene art and delicate culture that we romanticize today. It was a battleground of power, where city-states plotted against one another, where mercenary armies switched sides for the right price, and where loyalty was often little more than a mask for survival. Machiavelli was no distant philosopher sitting in quiet contemplation. He was a statesman, a diplomat, and above all, an observer. He negotiated with kings, witnessed political upheavals, and endured imprisonment and torture when his own side fell out of favor. Out of this life of turmoil, he wrote a book that would forever change the way the world thought about power, The Prince. When The Prince was first circulated, it shocked Europe. Unlike other political treatises that clothe governance in morality, religion, or idealism, Machiavelli stripped politics bare. He revealed it not as a noble pursuit, but as a brutal chess game where morality was a luxury and survival the only law. He argued that rulers should not strive to be good, but to appear good. That fear, not love, was the surest foundation of authority. That manipulation, not honesty, was the lifeblood of power. For his critics, this made him a monster, a prophet of lies and cruelty. But perhaps that judgment misses the point. Machiavelli was not creating these rules, he was exposing them. He was holding up a dark mirror to human nature, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable reality that beneath the surface of civilization, people are driven by fear, greed, envy, and the desperate need for approval. Leaders who ignore these truths, he warned, are doomed to fail. What makes Machiavelli so enduring is not his relevance to kings and princes of the 16th century, but his relevance to the boardrooms, parliaments, and media empires of today. The tools may have changed, but the instincts have not. Modern corporations manufacture desire in the same way princes manufactured loyalty. Politicians stage-manage appearances to look virtuous while negotiating in the shadows. Media companies exploit fear to capture attention, because fear is more reliable than reason, just as Machiavelli wrote centuries ago. Consider the way advertising manipulates emotions. A product is rarely sold on its practical merits. It is sold on the promise of belonging, of status, of security. These are the same levers Machiavelli identified as the driving forces of human behavior. Or consider modern politics, where slogans and carefully crafted soundbites often matter more than policies themselves. Behind every smiling leader is a team of strategists calculating the precise balance between fear and hope, between being loved and being feared, that will keep the public under control. Machiavelli's gift, and his curse, was his ability to describe human beings not as we wish they were, but as they are. His insights remind us that manipulation is not an aberration of society, it is its foundation. Power has always relied on perception. And perception, once shaped, becomes reality. To dismiss Machiavelli as merely cynical is to miss the warning he left us. He did not invent manipulation. He revealed it. He showed us that the chains binding human freedom are not forged from iron, but from illusions carefully crafted by those who understand how easily people can be led. The question is not whether manipulation exists, it always has. The real question is whether we choose to recognize it, or whether we remain blind, comforted by the very illusions that control us. Every age has its rulers, but not every age understands the machinery that keeps them in power. When we speak of manipulation, we often think of crude lies or obvious propaganda. But true manipulation is more refined, almost invisible. It works not by forcing people to obey, but by shaping the very thoughts they believe are their own. It works by bending the psychology of the crowd. Machiavelli observed this with unflinching clarity. He wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both." He was not prescribing cruelty for cruelty's sake, but diagnosing human nature. Fear, more than reason, compels obedience. And rulers through history, from emperors to presidents, have learned this lesson well. Fear is the most reliable tool of control. In the Roman Empire, rulers staged brutal spectacles in the Colosseum, not only to entertain but to remind the masses of the empire's power over life and death. Centuries later, during the Cold War, governments magnified the threat of nuclear annihilation to keep their citizens unified and compliant. And today, fear still drives obedience, though it wears a subtler mask. Whether it's the fear of missing out, the fear of social rejection, or the fear of being on the wrong side of public opinion, modern power brokers weaponize fear as skillfully as emperors once did. But fear alone is not enough. To keep the crowd in line, rulers rely on repetition. Repeat a message often enough, and it ceases to be questioned. This is not new. Ancient rulers understood the power of slogans and symbols carved into stone. The Nazis perfected it with Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, a phrase drilled so relentlessly into the public mind that dissent felt unnatural. In our age, repetition has been mechanized. Algorithms serve us the same narratives, the same outrage, the same distractions, until they become inescapable. What was once shouted from podiums is now whispered endlessly through glowing screens. Then there is the timeless trick of bread and circuses. The Roman poet Juvenal mocked the masses for trading their freedom for entertainment and food handouts. Today, the circus has expanded. reality television, celebrity scandals, and endless consumer distractions keep the public pacified. We may not gather in stadiums to watch gladiators, but we scroll for hours, our attention harvested, our passions redirected into manufactured spectacles. The form has changed, but the function remains the same: keep the crowd docile by giving them enough pleasure to forget their chains. Another subtle tactic is controlled opposition. Machiavelli knew that rulers sometimes allow small pockets of dissent, not to empower them, but to control them. By channeling resistance into harmless avenues, power neutralizes it. In modern times, we see this in politics that presents itself as polarized choice, when in reality both sides serve the same underlying interests. The people believe they are resisting. In truth, they are still within the boundaries carefully set for them. To understand why these tactics work, we must turn to psychology. Human beings crave consistency, and when confronted with contradictory truths, we experience cognitive dissonance. Instead of facing painful realities, we rationalize them away, convincing ourselves that the comforting lie must be true. This is why propaganda does not need to be flawless. It only needs to be repeated until it becomes easier to believe than to question. There is also the herd mentality. Alone, a person may think critically, but in a crowd, doubt is dangerous. We mirror those around us for safety. This instinct, once crucial for survival, now makes us vulnerable to manipulation. If everyone around us repeats the same slogan, celebrates the same celebrity, or fears the same enemy, we conform, even if somewhere deep down, we sense the absurdity. And perhaps the most insidious trick of all, the illusion of choice. People resist blatant coercion, but they embrace the feeling of autonomy. Clever rulers, advertisers, and media platforms present us with countless options. This candidate or that, this brand or that, this narrative or its carefully curated opposite, while ensuring that no matter what we choose, the outcome benefits the system. We believe we are free because we can select from the menu, never realizing that the menu itself was designed for us. Machiavelli's brilliance was not in inventing these tactics, but in revealing them. He forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth, that manipulation is not an aberration, but the norm of power. And though centuries have passed since he wrote The Prince, his insights echo in every headline, every advertisement, every outrage cycle on social media. Fear, repetition, spectacle, controlled dissent, psychological tricks. These are not relics of the past. They are the very water we swim in today. If manipulation is the tool of power, the human mind is the soil in which it takes root. To understand why manipulation works, we must first confront an unsettling truth. The greatest weakness of humanity lies not in the strength of its rulers, but in the structure of its own psychology. At the core, humans crave certainty. We are terrified of ambiguity. The unknown feels like chaos, and chaos feels like death. This craving drives us towards simple explanations, even when they are false. Complex truths exhaust us, but simple lies comfort us. A dictator, a demagogue, or even a clever advertiser only needs to provide a clear story, an enemy to blame, a product to worship, a savior to follow, and most people will grasp it eagerly, because the alternative is to live in uncertainty. In this way, manipulation thrives not on the brilliance of the manipulator, but on the mind's hunger for clarity at any cost. We also crave belonging. Few fears are as primal as the fear of isolation. To be cast out of the tribe was once a death sentence. Today, this instinct still governs us, often invisibly. We mirror the opinions of those around us, we repeat what earns approval, and we silence the doubts that might earn rejection. This fear of exclusion is what makes the slogans of power so effective. It is not that everyone believes them, but that no one wants to risk being the one who doesn't. Then there is our desire for authority. Obedience, strangely enough, feels safe. To trust that someone else knows best relieves us of the burden of uncertainty. Psychologist Stanley Milgram revealed this in his infamous obedience experiments. Ordinary people, instructed by a figure in a white lab coat, were willing to administer what they believed were lethal electric shocks to strangers. They did it not because they were cruel, but because they trusted authority over their own moral instinct. Here lies the danger. Once a figure of authority positions themselves as legitimate, the masses will often surrender their judgment. Carl Jung offered another lens into this vulnerability when he spoke of the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. The more we repress uncomfortable truths about ourselves or our society, the more those truths control us unconsciously. A population that denies its aggression will be swept away by violent leaders who embody it. A society that denies its greed will worship wealth in secret. Our refusal to confront the shadow within makes us malleable to those who weaponize it against us. Modern neuroscience sharpens this picture further. The brain, it turns out, is wired for manipulation. Dopamine, the chemical of reward, is easily hijacked. Every notification on our phone, every like, every outrage headline triggers a drip of pleasure. Outrage in particular has become a profitable business. Anger spreads faster than calm, fear outpaces reason, and so algorithms are designed to feed us what will keep us scrolling, enraged, addicted. We are not only manipulated by others, we manipulate ourselves through compulsive behaviors reinforced by invisible chemical loops. This is the most unsettling revelation of all. Manipulation is not simply external. It is internal. It is not merely that rulers, corporations, or algorithms deceive us. It is that our own minds betray us. We prefer comfort over clarity, authority over uncertainty, belonging over truth. And so we participate, often willingly, in our own enslavement. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He did not need neuroscience to see that people cling to illusions more tightly than reality. His insight was simple but devastating. To control the crowd, one does not need chains. One only needs to give them the certainty, the belonging, and the authority their minds already crave. When we think of manipulation, we often imagine dictators, iron-fisted rulers, propaganda posters, and marching crowds. But some of the most dangerous manipulators do not come dressed in uniforms or draped in flags. They come disguised as intellectuals, scientists, philanthropists, and leaders who claim to act for the greater good. This form of manipulation is far more insidious because it hides beneath the mask of benevolence. Where the tyrant rules by fear, the benevolent manipulator rules by persuasion, convincing the people not that they are oppressed, but that they are being cared for. And this is precisely what makes their power so enduring. History offers countless examples. The so-called enlightened monarchs of Europe who claimed to rule in the name of reason and progress, yet tightened their grip on the masses. The technocrats of the 20th century, who promised that science and efficiency would liberate humanity, but in practice turned individuals into statistics, stripping away individuality in the name of order. Even today, politicians and CEOs speak of innovation, equity, and safety, while quietly consolidating control through technology, surveillance, and carefully curated narratives. Nietzsche warned us of this danger when he spoke of the last man. The last man is not enslaved by chains, but by comfort. He does not resist tyranny, because tyranny comes not as brutality but as convenience. He lives under rulers who promise ease, security, and entertainment, and in exchange, he surrenders his freedom without a fight. The last man is the dream of the benevolent tyrant, a population too comfortable to question, too distracted to resist. And here lies the brilliance of subtle manipulation. It does not silence dissent by force. Instead, it drowns dissent in a sea of noise. Orwell called this doublethink, the capacity to hold two contradictory beliefs at once. In modern society, it is not uncommon to see this principle at work: the endless flood of information, fact checks, counterfacts, and conflicting headlines that bury truth beneath a mountain of contradictions. This is how manipulation thrives today, not by erasing truth, but by overwhelming it. When every perspective can be spun, every narrative reframed, and every fact contested, people give up searching for truth altogether. They retreat into tribal comfort zones, repeating the slogans of their chosen camp, not because they believe them, but because they no longer know how to tell the difference. The pseudo-intellectual plays a central role in this landscape. Cloaked in authority and jargon, they turn complexity into dogma. They insist that questioning them is not curiosity, but ignorance. Their arrogance does not elevate truth, it buries it beneath layers of condescension. They are the priests of the modern age, wielding data and theories instead of scripture, but serving the same function, to dictate reality from above. Thus, the benevolent tyrant and the pseudo-intellectual are not enemies of freedom in the obvious sense. They are its false guardians. They speak the language of progress, wisdom, and care, but behind their words lies the same timeless goal, obedience. If manipulation surrounds us, the question becomes unavoidable: how do we resist it? How do we avoid becoming another pawn in a game played by those who understand power better than we do? This is where Machiavelli, often vilified as a teacher of deceit, becomes unexpectedly valuable. His genius was not in teaching rulers how to lie, but in teaching us to see through the lies that rulers tell. He stripped away illusions, insisting that words were masks and that the true nature of power is revealed only in action. Machiavelli's first lesson is deceptively simple. Watch what people do, not what they say. Words are cheap, infinitely malleable, and endlessly recycled. Every politician promises unity. Every company insists it values integrity. Every leader claims to act in the public's interest. But beneath this theater lies the only reliable measure: behavior. Who benefits from their policies? Who suffers? What do they consistently choose when forced between principle and survival? The second lesson: morality is the language of power, not its essence. Leaders will cloak their decisions in the noblest rhetoric: justice, equality, freedom, but their calculations are almost always strategic. A king may claim divine authority, a general may invoke patriotism, a CEO may speak of changing the world. Yet all are operating under the same cold logic Machiavelli described: preserving their position, neutralizing rivals, and expanding influence. To see through lies, one must learn to separate the moral story told from the strategic motive concealed. The third lesson is subtler: what is not said often matters more than what is declared. Silence is one of the most powerful tools in manipulation. Consider the political speech that spends hours celebrating progress but never mentions the price of that progress. Or the corporate statement that condemns a scandal without ever acknowledging its role in causing it. The omissions reveal more than the declarations. By learning to read the negative space, the silences, the evasions, the things conveniently forgotten, we begin to see the shape of the truth. This lens does not apply only to politics or corporations. It applies to personal life as well. A friend who constantly reassures you of their loyalty but disappears in moments of crisis has already revealed the truth. A partner who proclaims honesty but dodges your questions has already spoken through avoidance. Lies are not only spoken, they are lived, and actions betray what words conceal. To think with Machiavelli is to train the mind in suspicion, not paranoia. It is to accept that human beings are driven by fear, ambition, desire, and survival, and that these forces often outweigh ideals. By grounding perception in reality rather than rhetoric, we can begin to see manipulation before it ensnares us. The essence of Machiavelli's teaching is simple, but its practice is rare. Abandon the comfort of believing words at face value, and embrace the discipline of observing what lies beneath them. For those who master this art, lies lose their power, and the manipulators lose their grip. If manipulation is the air we breathe, then resistance must be more than occasional suspicion. It must become a way of life, a discipline of the mind and spirit. And the greatest philosophers understood this long before social media, propaganda machines, or psychological advertising existed. They understood that the battle for freedom is not external first. It begins within. Machiavelli gave us the language of power, but others gave us the tools to withstand it. Socrates, the gadfly of Athens, believed that the unexamined life is no life at all. He stood before the court that condemned him to death and refused to surrender his independence of thought. His armor was not wealth, status, or influence. It was the refusal to accept borrowed truths without questioning them. The first step in resisting manipulation is to question relentlessly not just the world, but one's own assumptions. For a mind that interrogates itself cannot easily be captured by slogans. Dictatus, the Stoic slave-turned-philosopher, taught that freedom lies not in controlling the world but in controlling oneself. External forces can strip away possessions, status, even dignity, but no tyrant can control the will of a mind disciplined in virtue. His practice was solitude of the spirit, the ability to step back from the clamor of the crowd, to recognize which battles are worth fighting and which are distractions. Solitude is not withdrawal but clarity. It is choosing to hear one's own reason above the noise of manipulation. And then there is Kierkegaard, who warned against the seduction of the crowd. To him, the individual must stand alone in authenticity, even if the entire world mocks or rejects them. He described despair as the sickness of refusing to become oneself. His lesson is courage, the willingness to stand with truth even when it isolates, even when it costs. For manipulation thrives on fear of isolation, and courage is the antidote. These three practices, solitude, questioning, courage, form the only reliable armor against manipulation. They are not abstract ideals but daily disciplines. To choose silence over noise in a world of distraction. To sit alone in reflection when the crowd demands conformity. To question one's own motives before surrendering to the voices of authority. To stand in truth, even when that truth comes at a cost. Resistance is not about becoming harder or colder. It is about becoming freer. A person who practices solitude cannot be drowned in propaganda. A person who questions cannot be enslaved by dogma. A person who has courage cannot be broken by fear. The manipulator's greatest weapon is the weakness of the manipulated mind. But philosophy, lived not as theory but as practice, transforms the mind into a fortress. It cannot prevent lies from being told, but it can prevent lies from being believed. And in that difference lies the only real freedom left to us. Throughout history, empires have not simply fallen because of invading armies or natural disasters. They have fallen because their people lost the ability, or the will, to see clearly. When citizens abandon critical thought for comfort, when they exchange truth for illusions, manipulation no longer requires chains or weapons. The mind becomes its own prison, guarded by the very people who live inside it. Machiavelli, often remembered as a cold strategist of power, was not merely speaking to princes and rulers. He was warning us all. His insights reveal an unsettling truth. Those who refuse to recognize manipulation are destined to be ruled by it. A society that is blind does not drift into tyranny. It walks willingly. It surrenders freedom for entertainment, justice for convenience, truth for propaganda. Look around. Entire civilizations today are lulled into passivity by the endless noise of distraction. Social media feuds replace political thought. Manufactured outrage substitutes for genuine conviction. And all the while, unseen hands shape desires, dictate fears, and engineer consent. The greatest trick manipulation plays is convincing people they are free, while every thought is carefully directed toward predictable ends. But there is a choice. Boys, you may not control empires, governments, or systems, but you can control yourself. You can endure the discomfort of truth, which burns but also liberates. You can resist the comforting lie, which soothes but enslaves. The individual who chooses to see cannot be enslaved, no matter how powerful the manipulators or how widespread the deception. The final warning then is this: stupidity is not harmless, ignorance is not neutral, and manipulation is not a game. They are the foundations of civilizational collapse. What begins as distraction ends as domination. What begins as comfort ends as control. The future will not be written by those who blindly follow, but by those who dare to question, to resist, and to endure the weight of seeing clearly. So ask yourself, will you remain a comfortable servant of illusion, or will you pay the heavy price of freedom? The world will always contain rulers and ruled, manipulators and manipulated. But the mind that awakens belongs to no one.